Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the GT3 World Championship here on Friday, round number 2 from Season 3 here at the Nurburgring. Round 1 was dominated by George Boothby. What can we expect out of the championship leader today? Hello, everybody. I'm Jesse Lee, joined by Ryan Mawson and Ryan Gill in the booth today on comms and in the broadcast, respectively. Ryan Mawson, week 1 was very interesting indeed. Contact late in that race, a pseudo last lap pass, and a win for Boothby over Jardier today. The tale could write a new chapter in that book between the two of them. We'll have to see. But what a fantastic week it was in round 2 now at the Nurburgring with the threat of rain.
Yes, thank you, Jesse. Great to be here once again back at Nurburgring. I've sort of spent a week here from the Porsche Cup that we had on Monday, but yes, we actually had a little bit of rain earlier on in the practice session. A lot of the drivers now having to try and refigure out their pressures and their tires. It was dynamic. We had quite the wet track. It's dried up now, and so far in practice anyway, it's looking like the Porsches are going to be some of the cars to watch, and that will really put that that fight that we mentioned between Jardier and Boothby back on edge. I think it's going to be an awesome duel at the Nürburgring. There are some great passing opportunities here, and there's so much time when drivers can fully commit to their car. But with these top split drivers, I expect some really, really amazing driving today.
Well, I was watching some of these drivers in their own streams practicing for today's race. Don't tell me they don't take this seriously. Certainly they do. And of course, the threat of weather does nothing to a racing driver except throw a monkey wrench into the scenario as well. Like you said, it was raining in practice. It quit, and it's gone from damp now to greasy and now to green as the track goes back the other way. And I was remarking to you privately earlier, they were running 58s on a damp racetrack. That's not too much slower than I can do in the dry. Impressive laps by these pros.
Absolutely, and as well, what was even more amazing to see is with the 29C track temp, it dried off incredibly fast. But the length of time that these drivers can nurse those wet tires around, you know, you've got to sort of factor it into your setup here when you're given a race that has the possibility for quite a varied weather change, especially in the Ardennes Forest. We know that she can be very cruel with the weather and the sudden downpours. You have to factor that in. And we just saw the racetrack getting drier and drier, lap after lap. You're thinking these drivers have surely got to come in soon. These wets must be burning up, and nope, they're still going and still going and still going. So you've got to plan for every eventuality in this season. You can't leave anything to chance, especially with, you know, people are chasing every single point and chasing championships at this rate.
Well, you certainly do. We were looking at the sidewalls of the tires earlier, trying to determine who was first out on slicks. I can tell you Jardier's out there on slicks, trying to get a little bit of dry practice in the race. Every single race, despite even if it is a championship race, it is sort of a test. You have to use all the experience you get. They're not practicing against Conways and Van der Velde's, Lawrence's, and Boothby's. They're usually practicing by themselves. So when you can come out here in sort of a track meet, sort of practice session, and it's changing conditions, that's valuable data that you can be getting. And I think that's what a lot of these guys were doing, as nearly everybody was out on the racetrack in the wet, trying to get a handle on it for setup reasons and to see how they stacked up against the competition. And of course, as the track dries, that's just another opportunity. How does my car handle in the changing conditions? What speed do I have relative to the other cars that I'm going to be racing? It's a numbers game, and it's a high speed one at that.
Yeah, and obviously you've got all the engineers and the other team members. Everyone will be watching, you know, your closest rival. like you said earlier, valuable data. You can see what is their setup doing, how does their car respond, are we better at a certain part of the track than them? It is all, especially around Nurburgring, like I said, there is not many places where you can just sort of outright outdrive someone. I find a lot of the times when the packs get closer and closer and closer and the racing gets more tight, you really have to pick your moments, and it just becomes so difficult to pass. Whereas, you know, the slower or the bigger pace gap that you have, it gets that little bit easier. But I expect to see some great defensive driving today and some amazing passes. So I've seen a few here. I'm wondering if there's a few moves that people might pull. I won't say them yet, just to see if anyone does do them. But I've seen them before. It would not surprise me if the pro drivers can pull it off.
Well, of course, qualifying incoming here for the second round. Qualifying here, very important indeed, as they only have 10 minutes. And I was talking to the race admin earlier, just right before we went to live pictures, about what we could expect from the weather. And according to what I was told by the admin, this is exactly what they expected, and this is sort of what it looked like in practice as well. A steady, consistent rain, not a very heavy rain, but a very consistent rain that will put water on the racetrack, and it's only going to get worse if the session is to be believed, and in this case I believe it is. But again, only 10 minutes, and this is pretty much what you got. And in a session like this, Mawson, you know as good as I do, you have to be out there this entire session turning laps, because the track will improve with all these cars on the track, and you definitely want to be one of the last over the line.
Yeah, the sort of the 10-minute quick qualifying, just completing an outlap here will eat up easily 2 minutes of that. And the wet tires not as critical to sort of break in as the as much as the slicks that are, but you don't want to be, you know, sitting around cooling them off and wasting more and more time. And yeah, once we've got all the cars on track, you know, we have around about 30 cars here today. All will be turning laps. It might just get towards the end where there's, you know, this a damp line, and that might just be, you know, that 10th, that 100th, that 1000th that a driver needs to take pole. So you definitely want to be the last across the line and set your car up, you know, for a good, amazing run. I think the Porsches are definitely going to be one to watch, like this car here, the number 9 of the Yas Heat. It'll be interesting to see what they can do. Can they take the fight back to Jardier once again?
It's going to be interesting, and I'm looking at this man, Tico Vandervelde. I'm looking for something out of them. I think they finished just about 4th a week ago, and I expected just a little bit more out of the McLaren, the 166 team. They just didn't quite have it for whatever reason, but that is certainly not indicative of Tico's pace, and I think today we could see a more accurate representation of that, albeit if not for the weather. You can already see it, that line sort of forming, the non-shiny part of the racetrack, the matte-looking track in comparison to the slicker, shiny part. You're already seeing that, and we're not even halfway through this session. That's only going to improve. It would be a big ask for this track to get back to greasy in this weather condition, but nonetheless, the racing line can shore itself up and run quite a bit quicker laps. Still waiting for the first car to come across the line to set the first lap. Of course, the other big consideration you have to make when you're here is invalidating your lap. You know, Ryan, there are a few corners here that even if you put one tire over it, it will give you an invalidated lap.
This corner being one of them, the Schumacher S. You can see the car dancing around there in the wet. In the dry, you would be told, you know, to take as much curb as possible to get the better run. And in these wet conditions, though, the painted surfaces are absolutely, they're just sheet ice. You can see when Tico goes over each of them, dancing the car around. We saw it through Mercedes Arena, you know, the slow section of the track where you're relying entirely on the mechanical grip of the car, which McLaren more favors its aero, and this little final chicane You see, chuck it in left, chuck it in right, and hope that you don't run out wide here is the most horrible feeling when you invalidate it on the last corner, especially if it was such an amazing lap. But coming up to the line does the 166, and the provisional time will be a 2-minute point 3.
That is the mark to beat early, Tico, with the opening lap. Rins Krozen came across the line, was 9/10 down. Verstappen across the line, 8/10 down. Nobody getting close. Harley Chamberlain 1.5 seconds off, but there it is. George Boothby in the 75 Porsche, the Yaz Heat driver, all the way up to second place, 33 100ths off of the pole position, and nobody ducking down pit road. Realistically, a couple of cars, the 840 for instance, down pit lane. Everybody else continuing, trying to put heat in the tires, trying to keep heat in the tires and the brakes. You don't want to have to reset here, because if the track does improve even just a little bit, then you want to be out there on the hot tire at the right moment. But again, it is fairly steady treading out there, as you said, Mawson. You don't want to go anywhere near a curb. You don't want to go anywhere off the racing line for that matter either in these conditions.
No, absolutely. And like I say, you're just trying to eke out everything of that can possibly be. 4 minutes 13 left on the clock. So all the cars now that are still passing the line, they will get 3 laps left. It's like you said, for cars looking like the 171 that's just flying past the comms box, he will realistically be one of the last cars to get that magical third lap. Could that be anything for their position? We'll wait and see. As the 108 takes the Schumacher S incredibly wide, and that is what I mentioned. You take the regular line that, you know, so many drivers, you have the muscle memory, it's ingrained into you to take that line, and the car will just wash out from under you. And the Schumacher S is quite it's quite a difficult corner. You know, being the uphill, you would think that it would actually be a little bit easier to control the car if it washes out from under you. You know, you haven't got gravity assisting the car away from you. But I always find that if you go slightly wide in the Schumacher S in the wet, it is always quite a handful to recover the car.
One of the most frustrating things with going off in the S's, of course, is a sand trap on either side that slows you down. How about the chicane as well? Also being a big problem. You miss that corner, you're either going over a curb launching into the air, or you're going off into very wet grass. It is a purgatory out there between the penultimate and the final turn, something you don't want to do. By the way, Jardier in the 39 Porsche, fastest of all, a 2-minute .087, but that lap beaten by him again. So Bess is on time. We're in the 59s, a 1:59.790. Half a second clear. Caracas in the 15. Tico Vandervelde to push back to third, as again, case in point, the track seems to be getting a bit faster. Maybe if it isn't getting faster, the tires are certainly sticking a little bit better.
Yeah, down into the 59s now. In these conditions, you know, like you said, a lot of times people manage to only go a little bit faster than this in the, you know, in dry conditions. The rain is definitely not dampening down Yas Heat's day. They're keeping the heat well and truly on for their championship run. Mikael Sundstrom, he improves as well up to the 11th place in the 899. And sure, that's quite a handful in these conditions as well. The big old Mercedes, you know, even though we have the Mercedes arena, this car, it's definitely an interesting one to drive, I would say, especially around here. I know it feels a bit like you're driving an ocean liner. It might be a little bit apt for today, though, that big heavy V8 hung all the way out in front of the headlights.
Mikhail, no stranger to the wet weather races, and sometimes has done very well, but it is it's a big old car, and the engine's out front. It used to be in a GT3. That's kind of what you wanted, but perhaps not the case anymore, as mid-engine stability has only gotten better in the past decade or so. But qualifying continuing, going to have about 1 minute to go in the session. A 59.790 by Jardier, the quickest lap so far. Boothby slots in to second place, a quarter of a second down. And Massoum in the 49 Ferrari, the Iron Lynx team, Or actually, our Lynx is standard livery there, but the 49, either way, getting inside the top 10 into ninth place, improving as well, makes the ninth car, all within just about 1 second of each other. As Tico van der Velde has retaken second place in the 166, 18/100ths off the pace, moving Boothby back to third for the moment, who seems to be just a little bit off of Jardier's pace. But I know that Jardier, of course, working with Boothby with the Porsche, so certainly you would assume they're running similar stuff.
You would assume so. Obviously, both similar cars. I would say very similar drivers as well. The driving style when I've watched both of their streams before, and looking like it so far. Though we mentioned that magical last lap, it could possibly be. Boothby is actually up 4/10ths on this lap. You can see him fighting the car. This is, the one of the last do or die laps. It's now or never. And what is there left in the tank for this team? The 75, the Yas Heat, the car, that managed to win round one. Can they do it again in challenging conditions at arguably the Porsche's home track as well, as close as home as you're going to get it to its home in Germany? And blasting down the back straight, George Boothby still hugely up on his time, but now we're into the treacherous last section, the quick chicane. You got to not invalidate it, still not lose much time though. You can't dawdle through it. And round the last corner, you can see the car wants to wash out from underneath you, but you must control it and say no, we do not. Blasting up to the line, the 75 Yas Heat. What time will it be? It will be a 59.256. That is a blistering time in these conditions.
Oh, I think Jardier, who went into the pit lane, was comfortable with his lap time, and I wonder if he didn't think that it could be beaten, or maybe didn't care. But Tinko is going to lose it here, was trying to get everything they could into the final corner, and just about loses it, saves it, mind you, that will not help him make a faster lap time, and in fact comes across the line. That was a valid lap apparently, but albeit a slower one for Tinko, and now they are dangerously close. What can Caracas do? Can Caracas get by Tinko in the final order here? We'll have to see. The Dark Shade V2 team in the very striking green McLaren. What is it going to be? And it will not be an improvement because I believe that lap was invalidated.
It did look like it, and as well for Tinko, that was such a disappointing moment because he was actually up once again. Looking at the delta around about a 0.2, 0.3, it was going to be incredibly close, and those are the last do or die laps. You know that it's going to be now or never that you take that pole, and if the opportunity arises, you've got to go for it. The McLaren just washing up away from underneath him, which is one of the harder sections for the McLaren. It is primarily an aero-based car. It prefers when you've got a bit of airflow over the car to get the shape of the body and the wing working with you. But all the slow speed corners that Nurburgring offers us, that car will really be quite a handful, I think.
Just a correction, I thought Jardier had ran his lap and returned to pit lane. Apparently he was on a lap and it did not go very well, so was forced by the virtue of the session ending to end his qualifying there. How about a look at the championship points after one round? It will be a mirror of how they finished 1 week ago, and what a race it was indeed, as we have the standings for you. Of course, all pros here. George Boothby was king in the first race, ended up winning the race. It was closer than that. You may not believe that if you weren't there, but Jardier ended up leading after the pit stops, and Boothby had to come back through, and with contact near the end of the race, Boothby would end up winning the race. Jardier would actually lose second place due to a late race incident there, and Konstantin Soldatov would finish in second place. 72 points, that's full points. Pole position, fastest lap, and the win for George Boothby. 58 for Konstantin Soldatov in second. Jaroslav Hanzik, also known as Jardier, in third place with 53 points. Nicholas Taylor had a good race in the 17, finished in fourth place with 48 points. Tico van der Velde in fifth in the 166 with 44 points. Caracas in sixth place with 40. Zhao Kavaka in seventh with 37. Adam in the 840 with 34 points. Harry Conway finished inside the top 10. And I'm told he's American this week for some reason. And 10th place there as well. Martin Lawrence, Rins Krozen, Mikhail Sundstrom, Mashum, Valentin Berrier, Martin Grady, who didn't quite have the race we expected out of Martin Grady in the 18. Tidge did not have a great race to start with. Neither did Minnow Krozen or Verstreppen, if I'm completely honest. And, of course, Stefano and Chamberlain rounding out the top 20. You talk about having a bad day. Those were bad. These were just a little bit worse as we continue to cycle through the back half of the field. And of course, these drivers either did not take part or did not score points in the opening round. Well, I think the stage is set today for another classic George Boothby Jardier battle. Ryan Mawson, don't let that dissuade you from picking anybody else. Who's your money on today?
Well, now that we're actually sat on the grid, and I'm looking at those clouds, we do have some light rain, but it looks like it might actually be getting a little bit lighter. It's so hard to tell now. It's really going to be down to what driver and what car, what setup even, is going to be the best in these changeable conditions now. I have a feeling that this is really going to be down to a race of strategy. I've seen Jardier do some phenomenal things in the wet, but I've also seen Boothby do exactly the same. I, in fact, have raced with Boothby before in the wet, so I know that he can definitely become very small in your windscreen as when the time arises. So, you know what? I'm going to put my money. No more bets, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to put my money on Boothby this race.
You didn't stick your neck out on that one, Mawson. I was expecting a very brave prediction. I'm going to go with Tinko van der Velde. I think he wins this race today because if the racing between Jardier and Boothby is as explosive as it was a week ago, where it came to contact to settle the race in the final lap, I think maybe somebody else has a shot. A week ago, of course, Constantine, I think, got through and ended up getting a second place finish. Maybe something like that today. The weather throws an additional gremlin into the mix as well. You're going to see a lot of cars all over this racetrack, including off of it today. It was fairly, I would say, mundane and pedestrian, a lot of the starting racing in the race a week ago. Didn't have a lot of accidents. The stewards were quite happy with how that race started a week ago. I think you're going to see the exact opposite here today, as you can see the sidewalls of all the cars, of the tires, and you won't see any Pirelli lettering on that. What that tells us in the booth here is that they're obviously all on wet tires. You'd, well, basically have to be a madman not to be.
Yeah, and with how close to the grid is, you know, all the way down into I think it's 10th place that you have to go to get out of a second. You can't lose any amount of time per lap, so it's wets for everyone, and then it will really be a case of a strategy call when it gets to the point of we have to pit. I think as well, it's really going to be the drivers that can manage tires. You know, we've seen some of these drivers before, where they're not necessarily got the most outright pace, but they just can really, really save those tires. That, I think, will come definitely into play. The wets, once they start getting hotter and hotter, and the track might get more and more dry, they will start to burn up, I think.
Remember about, I don't know, 1 minute ago when I mentioned you'd have to be a madman to be out here on the slick tire. Tom Bryant, who was down in the pits, said that Climbs thought about it and then put on the wet tires just like everybody else. Climbs in the 329 Porsche thought about it at the last possible second, put the wets back on the car. I just feel like that's well, I mean, it's not even the safe bet. I feel like it's the only bet. With all the spray being kicked up, the track completely saturated right now. Hopefully they get going. You'll start to see a drier line, not a dry line by any stretch of the imagination, but right now I can't imagine anything but the wet tire. This race is going to get drier, and perhaps, and even almost most likely, going to put on some dry tires later in the race, but just not the time for it right now.
Yeah, so it would not surprise me if we see a slightly longer than average, I would say, stint, because the longer that you go as a driver, you need to judge what the weather is going to do. You know, we only have a forecast for the next half an hour, which does say decreasing. But you can have it before where you've done the half an hour and it still only says decreasing, not stopping. Obviously, if you bank your entire pit stop on the fact it is going to stop after you've pitted, that can definitely unravel it for you. So I think we're going to see some long stops and yeah, hopefully some changeable conditions that will definitely make it interesting. We'll see who's got their setups right and who's got the plan for everything. You always got to have a plan for every eventuality in this season.
You sure do. Well, George Boothby picking up exactly where he left off a week ago. He was the pole sitter, the fastest lap, and the race winner from a week ago. Continuing that tradition, already has pole position today, a brilliant lap, and Jardier left without a rebuttal late in that session, but that matters not now. The front row, the two Porsches, and of course, as everybody forms up here 2 by 2 around the corner, and as far as the eye can see, it is wet here at the Nurburgring for round number 2 for the Friday GT3 Championship. We hope you are ready, because we are just about to turn the lights off and get this thing underway, and the green flag is out and everybody racing down into turn 1. It's an excellent start up front as the top 4 cars get all single file. Now they jockey for position down into turn 1, and it's looking like it's all going to go to plan as everybody in the back tries to brake. It's a clean getaway from Boothby. Jardier under fire but holds serve in second place. They're side by side for third.
The two McLarens still managing to go side by side each other. We've got one car off as well, just coming out of the Mercedes arena. But for the leading two Porsches, a clean getaway. Jardier immediately had to defend from Tinko. He knew that he didn't want to give him any amount of space. If you leave the door open for even a second, that man will take it. You had to defend it coming into the Mercedes arena, and so far, top 3 have managed to make a clean getaway. But once again, now it's going to be the two Porsches are nose to tail once again.
Battistella has a drive through, as does Adam, I think, in the 840. That will be for starting infringement. We're not in the correct place. It's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out. We saw one car as well get spat out of the middle somewhere around 10th place. And look at this. It went from defending to being on offense. Jardier looking up the outside, immediately putting Boothby under pressure. He was unable to do this a week ago, was about 9 to 10 seconds adrift somewhere near the halfway point of that race. It looks like the complete opposite here. Jardier up on the wheel.
Yeah, well, the 39ers obviously managed to find that secret sauce that they've got there all over the back of the 75, just about managing to get that car stopped. Jardier knows exactly where the front of his car is, and he's going to use every single millimeter of space to get it running a little bit wide. Tinko looks up the inside in that 166 McLaren. Not to be, though. I think Jardier is just managing to try and hold on. This is also probably one of the most scary places to be. You're in the middle of two great drivers. You want to attack Boothby. Obviously, it seems that the 39 has got the quicker early race pace, but every move that does not pay off and in the wet can send you, quite wide. The 166 will be there to capitalize on it, so he's going to really have to play his cards right, and the move is going to have to be a clean one and done before Tinko thinks about taking that position back off Jardier.
Well, you may have noticed there is a mandatory stop, and if you missed round 1, allow me to explain. The pit requirement is only 1 liter of fuel, no tire change required. though due to the weather and the length of the race, we have seen a mix of strategy. We saw that a week ago. We'll likely see that here today, albeit for completely different reasons. Something else about the weather we didn't mention is this will help them save a little bit of fuel, Mawson.
Yeah, so the cars will be a little bit lighter, and I think that might actually be partly what we're seeing up at the front. If you've got the two varying strategies, you know, going long and going short, they now vary so much within the with the rain. Short stop, you basically put a quality amount of fuel in the rain, and the long stops won't need as much fuel, but the difference between them will be quite dramatic. So it wouldn't be surprised if that's what we're seeing. Looking back through the field, William Stephenson, the rest of the field do managing to get away quite cleanly, but look at just cars as far as the eye can see, and the same thing. Every driver wants to get around the person in front, but it is so difficult in these treacherous conditions.
Being told by Ryan Gill that Juno Savalainen was the one that we saw spinning around the wrong direction in the Mercedes-Benz arena, and the tail of the tape seems to confirm as much, as they are the better part of 3/4, if not more, of a lap down. The only other car that off the pace is the 96. We didn't see what happened to the 96, but they are well and truly behind. We're going to take a look at the 100. That's Savalainen. No, that's not Savalainen. That is Savalainen, indeed, and that's what happened. The accordion effect in the arena, and just goes for a spin, and that's not terrible damage, but it's significant, and I believe, and yes, indeed, can confirm, Savalainen's already completed their stop, so that will put them behind the 8 ball, so to speak, because if this track does improve, which we think it might, as it's already gone damp instead of wet, they're going to have to come in again. That'll be an extra pit stop for them, and that will do them no good.
No, and that's what we were trying. You have to try and judge what the weather is going to do. Track now damp, and you can see as well some of the drivers coming down the pit straight, and we noticed trying to cool the tires off as the 81 tries to go the long way around Harry Conway up the Dunlop curve. That is a long old way to go around to the bottom. A valiant effort, but just not to be the 28 managing to get the drive up the hill. But you can see the 81, they're just all over them.
Reds Croson and Harry Conway, no strangers to each other. I was talking to Conway before the race, and they were more interested in the weather forecast than anything else as they were practicing for this race. And luckily for them, though, the forecast they were given does match the conditions, so they weren't called out by that. But right now, very much in a fight, Porsche on Porsche, and Verstappen, by the way, in the 747 Bentley right behind them as well, all in a line. Meanwhile, up front, these two have distanced themselves. It sounds like a broken record from last week. These two have distanced themselves from the rest of the field, if not just by a second or so. Boothby and Jardier, and Boothby a week ago again was able to yard everyone else, but not allowing that to happen this week. Last week, Boothby was on a strategy of go as fast as you can and put as much fuel in the car as you need. Jardier was doing the opposite of that, saving a little bit of fuel. It got Jardier the lead, but the fresher sort of tires on Boothby's car near the end of the race ended up being the difference there, perhaps. Well, either way, they are sort of a team, right? But very much in the victory interview a week ago said no team orders between them two. They're going to race as hard as they would anybody else, and I think they proved that last week.
Yeah, very much so. No team orders were to be. A case of, you can share your fellow findings and your what you like and don't like about the car that your team is reusing with your fellow teammate. But it comes down onto the track. I think there's always the saying, on the track there is no friends, there is only rivals. Off the track though, you can have it as the 81 looks like they're trying to get a better run out of the Schumacher S up to the 28. They look to the inside of Harry Conway, think better of it, but you can see now the 81, that car, it does appear to have the better pace in these at least damp conditions now. But what is it going to do when it dries up? We might be seeing what is the difference between a mixed setup. Harry Conway obviously had the weather forecaster would have factored that into his setup of making it a hybrid. As it looked in the background like the 747 was briefly going to look up the inside of the chicane. The Porsche's all over it, but backs out of it. But yeah, I think the 28 might be on a bit of a hybrid setup, and we're seeing the 81 on a more wet focused setup.
Very well could be the case. The stewards haven't been ultimately busy today, but they have been busy nonetheless. Of course, live stewarding on Friday, as you would expect. A lap 1, turn 3 incident between the 86 of Verschell and the 100 of Savalainen. Drive-through for car 86 for moving under braking and taking out the 100. Racing incident for a lap 2, turn 7 incident between the 82 and the 144. And racing incident for turn 7, lap 2, between the 747 and the 840. So only the one penalty, and that was for Herbert Verschell's part in the Savalainen incident. Actually coming through now. No further action for a lap 3 incident involving the 108 and the 98.
And speaking of the 747, that looked like it was a brave move coming into turn 1, and they were trying to hang all the way around the outside of the Mercedes arena. It just wasn't to be. But now they've put themselves with the 18. Am I grading this contact? The 747 has a half spin, manages to get back going again. That is the number 8 as well. That's Barazigi managing to get at least one position out. Looks up the inside of the 747. It was not to be. And you can see 2 into 1 does not go. And the 747 ends up spun around. The Porsche managing to scuttle away from danger by mere inches.
Well, you talk about, as Nicholas Taylor here is trying to do their best to get the position away from Verschell, and in fact does. I thought they'd given that up on the outside there, but not to be outdone. Nicholas Taylor, the Pleb Nico Racing, getting a spot there up into the 6th place. A week ago we talked about how stewarding is different here at RCI now. The penalties are somewhat harsher for incidents that could have been avoided, and a lot of inconsequential contact are completely dropped now. And of course the stewards there deemed that Verschell went above and beyond what would be considered acceptable with the spin and got an automatic drive-through. But I do know this is not as bad as that could have been. In some cases, if it's felt warranted for a lap 1 spin, the stewards will be handing out stop-go tins in the future. So that's not the worst case scenario there. Certainly felt that it was worthy of a penalty, but not worthy of a max sort of penalty.
Yeah, so it just means now that a lot of the drivers you've got to sort of watch and keep it all in line and all in check as it was. But that also does not mean that we're just harsher on everything. It's like I said, we've already had quite a few racing instances. In case of the smaller things, will become racing instances. If you've actually done something wrong, you will be penalized a little bit harder. The 33 as well, we're getting a nice onboard from that. The Ferrari, another car that it's a bit of a hard one to judge in the wet. We see this car sometimes be amazing in the hands of the right driver. In the wet, it really seems to be a mixed bag. Some drivers manage to do great things with it and others really struggle, but I think as it dries out more and more, the Ferrari might actually come back on song again. You can see some of the drivers immediately diving off what is the known racing line. They're trying to cool the tires down. There will be a little bit more water left on the edges of the track where the cars are not running, and that might eke out your wet tires maybe 1-2 more laps, just give you a little bit of advantage. You can see everyone diving to the inside of the pit lane. That's not for any kind of drafting effect. That is just to get some cooling water on the tires.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is the part of the race now. It's pivotal. You don't want the tires to boil over, and they're getting close. If you can kind of judge by what color the track is and how much spray is being kicked up. Almost none, if any, at this point, and certainly there are puddles and everything, but the car's venturing offline pretty much tells you everything you need to know about what the track condition is. If they're diving offline, that means that their tires are not getting cooled at all on the line itself. So George Boothby, by the way, in the race, his dad in chat as per usual. Hello, Mr. Boothby. Actually telling on Jardier. Jardier, we talked about how he was all on the back of the 75 trying to make that pass earlier. Well, Boothby's dad, Mr. Boothby as I call him, has actually told us that he may be 35 kilograms lighter on fuel. So if that is the case, this is almost the exact opposite of what we saw a week ago.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I theorized earlier, is that the 39 looks like they had amazing pace right off the bat, and I think because of the wet, it helps the fuel economy. I think that's exactly what we're seeing in the 81. That might have finally got the pass done on Harry Conway, the 28, but they cannot get the drive that the 28 can around the outside. It's too wide down the back straight. There's barely a paint in it. Ooh, as the 81 takes the wet curb, a little bit slightly there, still too wide coming up to the final chicane. Someone is going to have to give. The 28 is later on the brakes and manages to keep the position just about. The 81, once again, the nose twitching on that Porsche. It is not a car that I would be wanting to drive in the wet, is this Porsche. It is scary at the best of times.
Well, let's watch what happened here. How did Rins Krozen get beside Harry Conway to begin with? I'm assuming it has something to do with the S's. And yes, just going a bit wide there and onto the curb. You mentioned in qualifying, that's not something you want to do, but Harry Conway gets bailed out here. Not only does he have this corner go in his favor, and he's able to hang there. What you're going to see if the replay goes long enough is Rins gets on a curb himself. So the very thing that got Rins in that position to make that pass in the first place is the same thing right there that lost him the ability to take that position, because that just equaled them back up. And you always want to be the car on the inside going into the chicane. Excellent sequence of corners, and by sequence of corners I mean half a lap there they spent fighting for that spot. Keep them off the curb at this point still.
Very much so, and great respectful driving. You know, both drivers knew exactly where they were, and this is, you know, we've still got rain coming down here. These are challenging conditions even on your own, let alone when you've got another Porsche right beside you. And anywhere you look in this field, we've got all these battles. You flick here, the 82 of Menno Krozen. He's trying to get the place off the 68, and this little train is being led by the 777 of Dan Mulholland, the two Bentleys and the McLaren. And once again, the Bentley, another car that sort of, it doesn't excel, I would say, in the wet, but it is easy to drive and it is nice and forgiving. The only thing that a lot of drivers complain about this car is that the steering wheel is on the wrong side. But as I say, the steering wheel is on the right side of the car, and therefore it is right.
Well, I was actually having this conversation about 24 hours ago about how most racing circuits go in a clockwise manner, and sometimes driving on the right side could help you a lot spotting the pivotal right-hand corner. Certainly most circuits have more right-handers than left-handers, so it makes sense. So you have that, take that for what it is, and it could be an advantage in some cases. But a Bentley is a very, very large car. Jardier not giving up the fight for first place. George Boothby pacing the field, but Jardier right behind him. Let's talk about strategy real quick, Mawson. If Jardier is lighter on fuel, usually that means that they will have to take more fuel, which means more time in pit road. A week ago, it was the exact opposite. Boothby was going flat out. Jardier was saving fuel. He took less time, was able to jump him in pit lane. Could Jardier pull off the opposite this week? Somehow undercut them and still get out in front of Boothby?
It would really come down to once Boothby pits, we're going to have to see if the 39 has managed to save, save what is left on those wets in the drying conditions. I think that's partly why they've gone from trying to attack, getting ahead in the early race. I feel like Jardier is now just pacing him. He's trying to save some of the wets left so that as soon as Boothby is, out of the way, as per se, the 39 can push hard on the low fuel with still some good tyres. That is the only chance I would think is he manages to get back out ahead of Boothby, or have a phenomenal pit stop as well with a pit crew that's on fire. But as for Boothby, the strategy now is going to be you need to keep Jardier behind. You need to keep him to where he will always end up, behind you.
Well, of course, the stewarding team are somewhat delighted with how slow it has been in the stewarding box, but yet there have been a couple of incidences. Drive-through for car 144 for taking out the 82 in the first corner. Let's take a look here. This is definitely not the first corner, but is this the incident in question, perhaps? But either way, the 144 failed to hold brakes after spinning and made avoidable contact as well. So that's a drive-through and a warning for the 144 for that entire incident. And here it is. That is the incident there that got the 144 their penalty. 5-second penalty as well for car 18 for braking late and causing contact with the 747. And position was returned. This is what we saw earlier. We saw this live. The two cars coming down into the hairpin, and as you say, 2 into 1 doesn't go, and a little bit of a spin. Position was returned, so only a 5-second penalty, and the only other racing incident between the 81 and the 28.
Yeah, so considering the conditions and how close some of the racing's been, not actually too bad, all things considered. And speaking of weather as well, looking back up to the forecast, have we noticed now 30 minutes it will stop raining. So that is really going to be interesting for the last perhaps it'll be 20 minutes around about when the rain is going to stop. Question is though, will it dry up fast enough? We saw in practice that it was a 29C track temp, and it did dry up very, very quickly. 27 today, a tiny bit cooler, but I think it could do the same thing again. Who is going to gamble for the dry tires, if at all? But I think it's going to be favourable for Boothby. He's got the heavier fuel load. He can go longer now. He can judge what he wants to do, whereas Jardier is going to eventually get to the point of no return, where he's going to have to make a strategy call of pit stop or try take the position now and run away.
Talking about this pair, Mr. Boothby, as I call him, is saying that George was giving Jardier tips and instructions on braking zones, even though they're fighting each other. Again, we talked to Boothby post-race a week ago about how they're same team, yeah, but they're very competitive, but they're also very friendly in the same respect. So, it has its perks as well, and certainly they continue on. Additionally, Mr. Boothby reckons, and I think this is an interesting thing considering we were talking about strategy, dry in 30 minutes, we assume, because the rain is going to stop fully in 30 minutes. The track will be drying before that point. It's already down to damp, mind you. That Jardier, he thinks Jardier was going to pit in about 30 minutes. That would be a perfect time to put drier tires on. And in that vein, I think you have to have dry tires.
Yeah, it's one of those, keep your eye on the racing line. It's one of those you can never fully tell, can you? Because there's so many variables that affect the track drying off. But I do think that anyone who does pit around about that half an hour to go mark is going to be on the dry tires. What will be interesting though is obviously the slicks will still be slightly slower than the wets. There is a crossover point. It will be really interesting to see what will happen. Will staying on the wets and burning them up a little bit, but accepting, a few good laps, be faster than going out on the slicks, having the better late race pace, but you've lost that time when they're heating up and the track may still be, you know, a tiny bit damp.
Well, all the teams will know what it's going to do, and I think everybody's going to be on the same page here, which is not a very often the case, but I think they're all going to be on team put the slicks on the car. We're not quite there yet, though, but we certainly will be ready whenever pit stops do occur. The front two lead the field by a couple of seconds. Tico Vandervelde doing a great job in third place, Caracas in fourth, and Fraven, the 77, rounds out your top five. And right behind them is Nicholas Taylor and Martin Lawrence fighting for Nicholas Taylor fighting Anna Frave for the fifth place position is what you've got going on here. As the wet weather, it was fully wet when we started, has now started to regress just a little bit. And at what point, Ryan Mawson, I've always wondered this, at what point in a changing condition like this do the curbs become a viable option again?
At least in my experience, almost never for the amount of time remaining that we're going to have on the race. The painted surfaces will hold that water on them for, you know, an extended amount of time, even after it stopped raining. You know, the cars don't generally run over there. A few corners might dry out a little bit, but then you undo all that advantage by going on the slick tires, which then, as soon as you've got them onto any kind of super wet surface, will completely lose grip. So if anything, you go slightly backwards, as the 98 is showing us that it is still definitely quite treacherous out there, giving a bit of a rear end wag and managing to keep the car back on the straight and narrow. The 98 as well, the Lexus, quite a rare car to see nowadays, so it's good to see one in being driven in anger in a championship. But we'll say that the V8 and that, when it comes down the straight, is probably one of the more unique sounds of the GT3 field.
Yeah, it's a fan favorite as well, that engine note. It's definitely distinctive. You could pick it out in your sleep, can't you? It is so different from the rest of the cars. A lot of brand and manufacturer recognition. We've got a Honda or two in the field, a Nissan GTR, even some Audis, and of course a Lexus. So pretty decent, all things considered. Here is Max Payne's GTR. And of course, they are down in 22nd place, but just behind a group of cars themselves. We had a Lamborghini a week ago, but I don't know if they're in the race this week. They might have signed out, but I'm not entirely sure. So I don't think we have any Lamborghinis in the race, though we did a week ago. Max Payne, though, trying to get out of the 20s and into the top 20. And can do with a couple of positions just in front of him. Looks like Mulholland there is keeping Minnow Crozen at bay, but pulling Max Payne back to him as well.
Yeah, the GTR is, like I say, a car that not is really driven in much anger anymore. It's quite a rare car to see as well, but you cannot deny that this car's party piece. It's the straight line speed that it has. So if Max Payne can keep this amount of distance when you're coming onto the back straight and the front straight at Nurburgring, he does have an advantage. But you can see how heavy this car is. It's not really a ballerina on its feet. It's not like one of the Porsches or some of the better handling cars. It is a bit more of a sledgehammer approach to GT racing of, can we have power and speed?
Have a bit of a strange thing occurring with George Boothby, your race leader. His MFD is not showing the pit window is open, though it very much is. Obviously, we see that it's open, and I think everybody else does. It's just him. So the admin staff here are trying to coach him and help him out with that, because that obviously is unfair. But trying to figure out exactly what's going wrong there and kind of coach him on what to do. I'm not an admin, but if I were one, I'd suspect they're saying just do as you would normally do and don't worry about it, is probably what they would say.
Yeah, a bit of an odd one. It's not exactly a technical difficulty that I've ever had to deal with, but you know, racing throws these things at you, and you have to deal with them. So 75 managing to battle technical difficulties as well as keep Jardier at bay somehow. And looking on the split account from the 911, the 899 of Mikael Sundstrom, these two have been chasing each other for quite a while as well. This little train that has been forming. The Aston Martin as well is another car that I think is really favouring these, you know, changeable conditions. Mikael Sundstrom, though, probably one of the better wet drivers that I know, managing to somehow keep that Mercedes up in front. I know that if you told me to pick a car to take around a wet Nurburgring race and still be in the top 10 in, you know, the split one of the Friday Champ, I would have not picked the Mercedes at all. But that just shows the pace of some of these drivers.
Yeah, it shows the pace of Mikael Sundstrom as well, bringing a non-preferential car into this condition, running in the top 10 in the top split. We don't say that much often. We expect you know, but of course this is the top split. These are the fast boys, as they say, and a lot of esports stars in the field. And again, I didn't need to tell you that because you likely know some of the esports stars in the field. And for Mikael to drive as quick as he is, the highest AMG, trust me, it is not easy. Oh, easy, steady on. Contact there, Kavaka. Just getting it wrong on the braking, leaving it a little late. Solotov in the 911 makes contact side by side, and they sort it out. Kavaka just sort of lets Solotov through. And we're going to take another look at this. Oh, yeah, just gets it a bit wrong, goes for the dive, and realizes he's in the wrong there and just backs out.
And good on the 911 as well, that they saw that accident was going to happen. You could see at the last moment the car twitch away and decided that you know, they were not going to be part of that accident at all. So that's the other thing with you can end up quite tunnel visioned onto the person in front, and when you're in a train of three, you've always got to keep, you know, one eye on the mirror that's happening behind you, and then one eye on the person in front of you. So a little bit of time lost to Mikael Sundstrom, but you know, a much bigger time loss avoided.
Yeah, I thought there was a Lamborghini in the race earlier. I mentioned as much. I thought that they may have not made it today. They did, in fact, make it today, but they have retired that Lamborghini. Chris Vining was the only Lamborghini in the field. He was here today and has retired. So has Savalainen in the 100 as well. Remember, they were involved in that lap 1, turn 3 incident, or turn 2, turn 3, depending on how many turns there is. I have to refer back to Ryan Gill to see how many turns are actually on this racetrack, but and nonetheless had that accident in the arena and has since then retired. And a frustrating week it will be for Savalainen for that retirement. Started well at the field, and unfortunately will get nothing for it, I'm afraid.
And looking back to the actual racing in front of us, Menno Krozen now. This car seems to be really enjoying the drying conditions they've caught. You know, really quite well up to the 777. Who, speaking of, throws it through that final chicane. There was absolute full commitment there. He's wanting to run away from the 82, but when you're racing, you know, someone Bentley on Bentley, it's the same car. It's all down to the drivers and the setup, as Martin Grady in the 18 looks to the inside of the 49 and gets the move cleanly done even before the apex, and that leads it into Mercedes Arena. You have to cover this corner off though quite a lot of times. Even if you've got the move done in turn 1, it can all come undone for you coming into the arena if you do not defend it. But of course Martin Grady knows this, and it's covered off, and now the 18 is back on the charge up the road.
This is very much a racetrack in Sector 1 where if you can get alongside somebody or down the inside of somebody, you can get a position away from somebody. But in Sectors 2 and 3, if you get stuck side by side with somebody, you're likely just going to be that, stuck side by side with somebody. It is quite a frustrating experience from right about here all the way to start finish. We saw the man in front of Verstappen here, Harry Conway. He was stuck with who was that another Porsche earlier, side by side the entire way up through this area. And that is just the nature of this racetrack. Your best bet to get a clean pass off is in a braking zone in the first sector, but you can send it on somebody down through here. and get a pass made as well. And if you're Jardier, you could pass on the outside of this chicane, which he has done several times here at RCI, and I'm not sure how he does that. He just ends up doing that. But for right now, Conway under threat again, this time from Verstappen. Oh, contact there a little bit, and it's going to be more contact as that had Harry Conway on the curb, spat him back onto the racetrack, and ended up getting back into Verstappen again.
You can see the speed difference though that the 747 has versus the Bentley versus the Porsche. It's you know, chalk and cheese. One of them has absolutely no speed, and the other is quite the straight line monster. The 28 trying to defend through the chicane. I think this is a race replay of it. You can see the closing speed. The 28 moves to the inside, and the wet curve, there is no grip at all. Spits him back out onto the racetrack, as he says, and just the 747 is already there.
So I do apologize to Verstappen as well. I thought there was initial contact there. That replay shows us it was clean. Conway was taking the defensive line, got on the paint, and just had no grip.
And like I said, I don't think that those painted surfaces are going to get any kind of better all the way towards the end of the race. That's going to be the other interesting thing. We've got so many battles like this where people are going, you know, too wide through sections of the circuit where the only drying line may be, you know, a single car wide. And once you put it on slicks, overtaking in certain areas becomes really quite the challenge. So I think the 747 knows this, and they know that if they're going to do the move, they need to do it while there's still some moisture on the track and get up the inside. And there is contact this time. The 747 touches the back of the 28 and goes through.
Well, I think Verstappen was tired of sitting behind the Porsche there and brute forced their way through there. I reckon Verstappen thinks they should have been through already and not taking no for an answer. Oh, and just moving Harry Conway, not only off the racing line, but off the track there briefly. Conway won't like that. I'm curious what the stewards will say about that as well, because that's the old bump and run, Mawson.
Yes, that's a bit of a using the Italian horn. You got to use your bumpers to let the other driver know. But I'm sure the stewards will have they'll be on the race radio having just a little bit of a word, possibly with the driver. I'm sure we'll keep an eye out for the fabled piece of paper come through at some point.
We might as well do. And by the way, you're not missing anything up front. Boothby and Jardier still leading 3.5 seconds out in front of Tinko van der Velde. And they're still nose to tail up there. And speaking of nose to tail, Anna Fraven Taylor, the 77 and the 17 respectively. This is for the top 5. They've been very close together, but no pass has yet come into fruition for either one of these, but no mistakes either. Matched equipment. We've seen a lot of that today, haven't we? It's almost Noah's Ark, almost biblical with the rain and the cars pairing off into twos. I can make all these references, but it is indeed the case. We got 2 Porsches up front, 2 McLarens, and then there's 3 Astons, but only 2 are racing against each other at the moment. Is this a story tale, or is this really happening?
It seems to be. It does make the racing quite a lot more interesting, though. You know, when even you know that the driver in front of you, you're racing, you're in the same car. A lot of these drivers will, you know, they will pick a main car and they will stay with that. Like, you know, for example, how many times have we seen, you know, Mikael Sundstrom in the Mercedes, for example? They will know that car like the back of their hand, and you know that the driver in front of you also knows the car like the back of your hand. So you can't, there's no advantage or disadvantage that either of you have over each other. It's a case of what is different on your setup to their car, and what kind of confidence boost do you have over that driver. And speaking of confidence boost, the 899 desperately tried to run away from a very angry there's the 911, and that is the 33 as well, the Ferrari in the background. They're still trying to fight it, coming into the turn 1, leaving it as late as they dare for the brakes.
Speaking of these two, warning for car 33 for excessively dive bombing the 911 into turn 1.
And that was the incident that we saw earlier where the 911 backed out of it. So obviously there wasn't contact, otherwise it would have it would have been noted. I think the 911 just managed to scuttle away at the last moment, but you still will get a warning for it. So the 33 now knows this, and they can't have any more funny business. And just up ahead as well, I think someone else has joined the battle. Is that the 171 of Martin Lawrence? I think it is.
Yeah, of course, all these cars are together, and they're all getting closer. And afraid might be the cork in the bottle here for Taylor, but the same could be said for Martin Lawrence, with Sundstrom, Soldatov, and Kavaka, who are all nose to tail as well. As how often do we see this in RCI races where they just basically pair off into groups and race each other? And that's what you've got here. This is all, of course, for the 7th place spot. And it's not out of the question in these conditions that a car in 9th or even 10th place could end up being promoted into that 7th spot if it all goes to their plan and goes wrong for those in front. It only takes a very small mistake, and never do we ever want to downplay the ability of these drivers. These are pros. They're very fast, but they're also incredibly consistent as well, including in inconsistent circumstances such as the weather here today. They make it look so darn easy.
Oh yeah, you see these cars going around with, you know, minimal dramas, and you think that, oh, it must be easy to drive, you know, that car in the wet that hard, that's easy. No, very much not the case. It's just these drivers are, you know, they've practiced this, they've learned it, they've refined their driving style. They're coming in too wide. The 33 trying to look around the outside of the 911, knowing that you can, as you mentioned earlier, if you can hang it around the outside, you can get the move done by the Mercedes Arena, but it's just not enough overlap to be done. I think that probably out of this train so far, it looks like the 899 and the 33 have the pace. It's just the traffic in front of them.
Another steward's decision coming in. Racing incident between the 28 and the 747. Noted small touch due to hard racing. 5-second penalty for car 28 for forcing the 747 off track with position not returned. And 5-second penalty for car 20, excuse me, I think I may have read that wrong. 5-second penalty for car 28 for forcing the 747 off track with position not returned. And a 5-second penalty for car 747 for tapping the back and forcing an overtake. So basically a punt to pass situation there.
So with that, they've cancelled each other out. Both of them will get a 5-second penalty. It looking like, though, that for Kilms and Bazagi in the number 8, that might actually be play into them a little bit. And that's the other thing as well, that not only can it play into your hands, you know, we're looking at battles like this where the drivers behind just need to keep an eye on what's happening in front. You've got to keep your nose clean. These little 5 seconds, you know, penalties, warnings, it all adds up, and it will slowly start to cost you points, and could towards the end of it cost you championship positions.
It could as well. Update on Boothby. Apparently they've been able to sort out the issues with their pit stop. It's now showing it is a valid pit stop. So crisis averted, as the glitch in the Matrix has been solved by one of his loyal viewers. You love to see that, the community coming together.
Yeah, so the technical foibles have been ironed out. I think, can you unplug a race car? Is that what you do? Do you have to turn the computer off and on again, and that will fix it? I don't think turning your MFD off when you're driving is probably advisable, but you never know. I think that's about what most technical support people would tell you.
I can tell you in the real world, that's exactly what you do. It's just like working in technical support. If you have a problem out on the racetrack and you get a moment, they tell you to cycle the electrics, turn it off, turn it back on. I think in a lot of modern cars, you have to actually completely stop, so it's not so great. I feel like it wasn't that long ago at Le Mans where you'd see a car going down the back straight go completely dark and then sputter back to life. Audi and Porsche come to mind in the mid-2000 teens, doing stuff like that, getting errors on the screens and part of the technical data. All they would do is shut the car off and shut it back on. Now, I don't have to tell you how dangerous it would be to turn your lights off in the middle of the night, but lo and behold, it happened more than a handful of times. In modern context, however, every time I've seen it done now, they tend to pull off the track for a moment, shut everything off and cycle it back through. Especially in the rain, I've noticed that happens where they have these electrical hiccups that occur and they have to cycle through their startup procedure to fix it. And I don't know if they had to do exactly that here today, but they definitely had to do something to get the MFD to register that the pit stop would be valid when it was taken. And even if they wouldn't have, I'm still sure that on our end, it would have probably been valid anyway, so it would have been a moot point. But it is reassuring to the driver, and you know that, Mawson, it's reassuring to the driver that everything reads green and you're all good. You don't have to do that extra calculation.
Yeah, it's what you're looking for when you don't want to be coming into your pit box. And the 911 throws it up the outside again, trying that move that he saw the 33 try on him a few laps ago. It is a move that can pull off, but it is a brave one, and it is a long way. Mikael Sundstrom would have known that and seen it in the mirror. Goes for the move up the inside of the Aston Martin, but not to be. Aston Martin is now wide. Is Martin Lawrence. Can the 899 get the drive using that big V8 engine? He's now on the outside for this section of corners. It's not to be. There is not enough grip. And they're off, and there's a contact.
No! Martin Lawrence and Soldatov contact there. You could just about see that coming. Cars going off the track. Soldatov gets it going. Lawrence gets it going. We're going to look at a replay here. I thought this was it. On the wet grass, trying to come back on the track. You can't brake, and contact with the 911, and that's not what the 899 wanted to see. Mikael Sundstrom, not Martin Lawrence. I do apologize. But that is unfortunate for Mikael Sundstrom. Just, I mean, you can say what you like. Had to go for the move all around the outside. Ran out of space, ran out of traction, and ran out of braking on the wet grass, too.
Yeah, once the 171, which was the Martin Lawrence car, slowed up, you had to do something. You're under fire from multiple directions. That move, I dare say that would have been a move pulled off in the dry, but just in these treacherous conditions, you run the tiny bit wide, you go off the line. Once you're on that grass, there is no saving that car really, and just unfortunate that the one, I think it was the 911 that got caught up in that as well.
Well, I can tell you the stewards are not amused by what just occurred. How can I tell you that? Because I can hear them, and that's never good. They're usually a very quiet bunch, but they're not amused by that. Certainly more work to do for them, and a frustrating moment for the 899 was well inside the top 10, now finds themselves in the 12th place position. Of course, Konstantin Soltov's going to be frustrated as well, did nothing wrong and got span around. But the silver lining, I guess, if you are them, is for the moment you're still inside the top 10, though that has brought Harry Conway into the race here for the 10th place position, as Sundstrom is down behind Conway in the 12th place spot. And, well, we're getting down to it. How long do these drivers wait before they come down to pit road? Certainly you would want them to wait as long as possible so that the track's in the best condition possible. But we're getting near the end of the race, and if nobody's come in yet, realistically, somebody might actually try and stay out there on the wet tires. That might be a bit of a late move, though. What do you reckon? Does anybody try and stay out there on the wets?
Well, I think that's why no one who's had to come in has done yet. They're trying to judge it. Obviously, the forecast says rain stopping in imminent, and as we mentioned that, there goes the rain cloud. The rain has now stopped. Just as I was about to say, it's about to change. It does. Commentator's curse works on weather too, apparently. I'll have to try this new power out later on, you know, see if we can make it dry sometime. But there you go. So now rain has stopped. Track will begin to dry. And with, you know, still we have quite a few cars running around. I think we're 28 or odd. It's going to dry up pretty fast, I think, especially at track temperature 30.
Yeah, it sure is. The sun's not going to come out, but it won't matter when the track is that warm. It will dry itself out in the meantime. It's still damp for the moment. Nobody making the desperate dive down the pit lane. I thought maybe somebody might do that to try and clear themselves from traffic, maybe put on some dry tires. If you are putting on tires, they have to be dry. At this point, you would at least think that, but somebody might try to stay out there, some mad lad with wet tires, and try to be a hero. We've seen that not only in the Friday champ, but in all the other champs as well, where somebody takes a stab at it because they're just close enough to make that strategy work. Sometimes it has worked, sometimes it hasn't. George Boothby won a race around here on completely destroyed tires by virtue of not taking any to save time. And in his victory lane interview, I asked him, did he know that was going to work? He said, mate, I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. And with the 30 seconds, you've got that gamble, haven't you? It's a 30-second to take the tires. You've got to make that judgment call. Will you lose 30 seconds by completely shredding those wets as it gets drier and drier and drier, versus someone who has to come in and put the slicks on, but they will lose time until the track gets dry enough to get some heat into them and the slicks start working. But I mean, looking at that track now, we've already gone to damp. I don't know about you, Jesse, but I can barely see any water really left on that track now on the running line.
Yeah, there was a bit of water off the racing line, but then it stopped raining, and now it's looking pretty darn serviceable, this track, Mawson. It's looking pretty good to me. Speaking of, by the way, we're looking at a Porsche. I want to talk about another Porsche, and before I do that, Jardier has fallen off about 1 second from Boothby, but it's so easy to gain and lose a second in the pits. It is a non-issue. Max Payne continuing to try and get by Minnow Croza. He will get by Minnow here by virtue of Minnow coming down the pit lane in the 82 Bentley. Among the first takers, several other cars down the pit lane. I think that's Darren Mulholland in the 777 as well, coming down pit lane. Before we get too far into this pit stop side, let's talk about some of the penalties that have come through. It's going to be a warning for car 28 for avoidable contact with the 747, a warning for car 747 for leaving no room and aggressive driving. That's a continuation of the 5-second penalties they got earlier, and a racing incident between the 82 and the 777. Stewart notes the 777 had a bad exit, and that's what caused that. Well, there you have it. I've also noticed some extra 5-second penalties as well that have come through. Of course, we read the Harry Conway one out earlier. Remember, had contact in the final corner. How do you feel about that? Car got loose on the wet painted stripe, made contact, and ultimately continued in front. Do you reckon that's a warranted penalty?
It is one of those hard to judge because the driver had physically made the move for that. I would say that was a justified penalty. Had you know, if it was a racing incident where you'd gone slightly offline and that was the accident that had resulted in, you know, that is all well and good, but because the driver physically made the move to that inside line, I think that's why the stewards have given him the penalty. And for the 39, Jardier has come in. We did expect him to pit around about with the half an hour to 20 minutes to go. That is 23 minutes to go for Jardier. I'm going to say that team will probably be putting the dry tires on. This track is just looking drier and drier, 30 degrees, and we've gone up to greasy now. So we've gone from damp, we're now just getting drier and drier.
Tom Bryant in pit lane before the race let us know that everybody was on the wet racing tires, now telling us that at least the 86, among others, are on the dry tire. I genuinely think for the vast majority of the field, this is the only strategy they have. I still think somebody might be bonkers enough to try. And by the way, we saw the 899 a moment ago. Drive-through penalty for the 899 for taking out the 911. a warning for the 911 for unpredictable behavior when rejoining after they were spun. Racing incident for minor contact with the 777, and racing incident for an overtake with minor contact between the 77 and the 17. And with that, the steward's box is quiet again, and that would have been, of course, what they were looking into. Drive-through penalty for Mikhail Sundstrom. Do you feel that was warranted there?
Once again, I think because the driver had physically made the move, it's I think that's what the stewards are going off. It is a case of when you're in the damn conditions, you have to go for the move, but you also have to be confident that you're going to pull it off. Once you got onto the grass, there was kind of there was nowhere to go. So it is a difficult one, and as I says, I'm glad that I'm not a steward, because there's decisions like those where I would sit and contemplate it for a long old time. But the 75 as well, talking back about the pit stops, 75 has come in, which has promoted this man, the 166, Tinko van der Velde. They have been promoted up into the race lead. And this is, I think, probably going to be one of the last cars that are still running around on these wet tyres. Obviously, everyone with the one next to the name as literally the whole pit board lights up now. Everyone coming in. I think it's only going to be one or two more drivers, but I could see very much a dry line forming there, Jesse.
Yeah, it sure is. The dark gray turning into light gray, denoting the dry line, and that's not a drier line, as I like to say. That is a fully dry line forming. The track has gone greasy, as we predicted, with the warm temperatures, and it'll do nothing but improve and take rubber through the duration of this race, 21 minutes till the end. We know we're not going to have any more rain as we get closer to the climax of the day. Tinko out front hasn't pitted yet, neither has Martin Lawrence, and Alexander Borodai and Barzaghi are the drivers inside the top 8, and of course the 49 Ferrari of Masum as well, who has just come down pit lane. So everybody but van der Velde, Borodai, and Lawrence have pitted thus far. And I think you might be right. Tinko might try to stay out as long as possible, try that overcut, try to get some of that time back here. Meanwhile, this is what we presume to be the fight for the lead. Boothby and Jardier, they went in 1-2, less than a second apart. They come out less than a second apart.
And there's the painted surface again. What happened to so many drivers we've seen? You just get a little bit wide of the Schumacher S. That is the position gained for the 39 of Jardier up into the lead. And that will also be the time that Jardier pitted earlier, you know, the 1 or 2 laps earlier than Boothby. His slicks have already had time to get some amount of heat into them, you know, with this drier line. Boothby came out on, you know, stone cold slicks. He's got to work them up to temperature, so the 39 can really start to push. Whereas the 75, they've got to think about the tires and the graining before they necessarily go all out. Do I think this battle is over though? Absolutely not.
Additional information, the 171 of Martin Lawrence has pitted, and that makes sense because they were running around 8th place before they came in, and they might have not put fuel in that car. They would have had to have not put fuel in that car for that pit stop not to be valid. You don't have to change tires. You only had to add 1 liter of fuel, which is tipping off our pit crew that maybe they only put tires on the 171. They'll have to come in again, otherwise they'll be given a massive penalty.
Yeah, so like we were mentioning, when you've got to look for all the greens on your MFD earlier, so the 171, they are back into the pit now, so we'll see what happens. I think this is just going to be a stop and drop for them, and they'll be back out. Sad to see, though. Obviously, they will be cycled out well down the order. And looking back down the field once again, Martin Grady, this man, trying to get by Frushell in the 86. The 86 was one of the first cars on the dries, actually, and it might have helped them a little bit. They got a little bit further up the road, you know, taking that early strategy call, but the 18 looking like they are back on the charge up the field, trying to go round the outside of turn 1. It's a long move. The Bentley's in deep. Can he keep it on the inside for the Mercedes Arena? No, he cannot. That is the move that you can pull off, but you've got to be that far alongside.
Valiant effort by Tidge, Martin Grady, but not quite to be there. As Herbert Frischel, who has had a penalty earlier in the race, trying to rebound back inside the top 20 and finds themselves in the middle of a sandwich at the moment between two very large Bentley cars. Going off track there, the 82. Minnow almost off the track, has to hit the brakes as Herbert Frischel, and here comes Grady around the outside. Can't quite do it. The inside prevails again and saves Frischel. Otherwise, that would have been a position loss. Turns out not to be, and going as sharply into the corner as possible as Frischel, trying to get around Minnow Crozen, and I think it's just going to be about enough as they go through the Schumacher S's. They should have it on the exit, and they do. Look at Grady trying to come through as well, and I don't know if Grady's going to be able to do this. Maybe if he gets boxed in, Frischel boxing in the 82. Grady trying to get a piece of this. Here's Max Payne, who's in this fight now. Max Payne has nowhere to go. Losing traction was Minnow Crozen. Nearly boxed Grady in, and now we have the entire order messed up. 18th, the 18 of Grady now into 16th overall, and now the GTR trying to make a pass, and look at that, off the track was Frischel. Grady now has gained 2 or 3 spots on this lap. Excellent driving by Tidge.
That was an absolute scramble for quite a few moments. The 18 just managing to play the cards right at each moment, trying everything. It kept looking like, each time that it was slammed in their face, they went a little bit for wide, the painted surfaces, they didn't get the run, and it just all managed to come to fruition towards the end of the lap. That is sometimes the advantage of being the driver behind. You're watching the people in front go too wide and battling in. It's never necessarily a bad thing to be able to sit back and monitor the situation. And yeah, Tidge took it excellently, has managed to get himself all the way up now into the 15th spot and trying to run away, I'm sure, from all that.
Tidge went from 17th at the start of that lap to the top 15 at the end, and all of that was patience and experience. Tidge has come a long way since he started racing ACC. He was a Gran Turismo Sport faithful and started racing ACC. Ended up, he really liked it, said it wasn't too different than GT Sport, and as somebody who's done both, I'm going to agree with him. It's not that different, funnily enough, and he fell in love with the racing here and has been here ever since. And a big hop there. Look at that Dukes of Hazzard style. Is that Verstappen? I think it is. It's the 747. Goes big style over the curbs, hits the giant knob, and goes airborne. Bentleys aren't meant to fly.
No, I think they're more of a little bit of a boat, and we see a race replay from the inside. You can see the sky through the windscreen. As a racing driver, the last thing you're really meant to be looking for, you're meant to be looking for the apex rather than the skyline. But the 747 does appear to have quite the aggressive driving style, I will say. That hasn't been the first time that they've hopped the curb like that coming into the final chicane. I saw it earlier, just about out the corner of my eye when they were battling in the wet. So definitely is the line that they like to take in that car.
Well, he's got the right number to be flying, but unfortunately he's the wrong manufacturer. I don't think Bentley makes jet engines.
At least not that we know of.
Yes, indeed. Nicholas Taylor, who has been defending and attacking this race, has caught all the way up to Tinko van der Velde and is trying to take the 3rd spot away. Tinko would like to finish a spot or 2 above where he was a week ago to confirm his championship hunt, but is under threat here from falling off of the podium today, as Taylor has whatever Taylor didn't have in that first stint. Maybe they had more of a middle of the road setup, or maybe it was more of a dry setup. Whatever they didn't have, because they certainly fell back, did Taylor, they certainly have found it here, as now they're threatening into the podium positions.
Yeah, the Aston Martin coming back on song now that it's got drier and drier, and I think partly as well, maybe the 166 is on, you know, a hybrid or a more focused wet setup, because they're not only have they been caught by Taylor and now in the jaws of the Aston Martin. Obviously, the two Porsches of Jardier and Boothby, they have scuttled up the road almost 9 seconds now. I think we might, in fact, during the next timing line, we might even see 9 seconds. And quickly Black flicking up the field. This is Martin Lawrence trying to go around the outside of Mikael Sundstrom. This driver's seen this move pull off a few times, wasn't to be there. And once again, a scary moment, but you always want to be the driver on the inside of that chicane. It is incredibly difficult to go all the way around the outside, unless your name is Jardier, in which case then magic shall occur and you will get the position.
The laws of physics do not apply to that man. Sundstrom and Lawrence will both be frustrated. They should be up inside the top 10 right about now, fighting for positions up there respectively, but unfortunately they're outside the top 15. Sundstrom, of course, had the penalty and the incident, and Lawrence has had to make a second pit stop to put the required liter of fuel in the car. They've rectified that in the 171 for Lawrence, but that has dropped them all the way to 17th place. I think they lost 9 spots doing that. And these two very fast cars, Sundstrom and Lawrence, but now behind the top 15 cars. Sundstrom looking to break into the top 15, but Mulholland is keeping them at bay, at least for the moment. This has been an interesting race. We haven't seen quite as many incidents as we normally expect out of a wet weather race around the Nurburgring. It's been very entertaining nonetheless. The top two chained at the hip, as it were, and a biblical 2x2 fashion up front early. The rain has since stopped. The clouds will not part, and looks like Sundstrom is going to throw it up the inside, maybe with a little bit of contact. But I'm pretty sure Mulholland's going to win this fight, and does, with the apex. Does Lawrence try to make a move to the inside? Nope, going to try to make a move to the outside here, and will try and force the issue. I don't think they're quite there, as they all end up single file, thank goodness, into the chicane.
Yeah, it was a drag race down the back straight versus that Mercedes and the Aston Martin. Both cars not exactly a slouch in a straight line. The Aston Martin with its famous turbo lag, and the Mercedes, you have to really rev it out to get all of the power that you want. But doing that just burns fuel like it's going out of fashion. So you have to keep one eye on how much fuel you're burning. Obviously, you don't want to run out. I'm sure that there will be a little bit of a headway, but I'm sure a lot of the drivers will want to cut it as fine as possible so that you've got, you know, those few kilograms saved on the end.
That's how serious it is in the Pro Series. They are trying to figure out exactly how much fuel they can do without weight shedding and the likes. So if you're sitting at home thinking, well, they're not really doing that, trust me, they are. They're absolutely doing that. They want to have as little fuel or as little weight as possible. There is the contrarian view of that as well, Mawson, where people will try to get the car to have a specific amount of fuel that gives it a preferential weight distribution. But I think most of the people would rather have as little weight as possible and tune around that. And I believe that is more than likely what everyone here has been doing, or has been trying to do. Certainly you've driven cars as well as I have, where under certain fuel loads they feel a little bit different. So João has taken the long way around the chicane into the final turn. Was there just a mistake there? Yep, hit the curb, couldn't get the car turned, goes to the grass. 15 minutes ago, that would have probably been a spin.
15 minutes ago, that would have been a much worse crash. She would have had absolutely no control on that grass. Just managed to get the 33 back on the road and back pointing the right direction. But yes, now the cars that come to mind a lot, and we keep mentioning it all the time, but it's one of the cars that's just the most dynamic, really, is the Porsche. It goes from, you know, quite a different beast, full fuel, depending on your setup. It can be almost understeery to when you have, you know, 1 or 2 liters left in the tank. It is very oversteery. And the 171 there, Mike Lawrence trying the absolute dive down the outside of turn 1.
We'll call that the desperate line.
Yes, that's it was an alternate line. We will mention that. But once again, not to be coming into the Mercedes arena. Can see now as well that the drivers are actually starting to use a lot more of the curbs. We've actually ticked over to a green track, believe it or not. Had you looked at the this broadcast, you know, 5-10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, the torrential rain is now completely gone, and the track's actually getting some rubber on it.
Yeah, it's looking pretty good, and it's shaping up. If you had a car that was really good in the wet, or you had a wet bias setup, you're not loving this. But if you set your car up to be a mix of the two, or perhaps even a little bit of a dry setup, anticipating it going dry, you're a very happy camper right now, as the ball is very much in your court, as we are in the final 10 minutes, the final 7.5 minutes of this race. Where has the time gone? Absolutely flown by in this one, and the battle's still not done. They're fighting for 15th, they're fighting for 7th, they're fighting for a lot of different positions as well, as Mikael Sundstrom seems to have just a little bit more pace in some of the corners than the Bentley. But the problem is, on the straightaway, the Bentley is just able to get enough of a gap that Mikael can't do anything into the corners like that, for instance. Just wasn't quite close enough. Was also defending from Lawrence behind. It's an unenviable position being in the middle.
Yeah, and you can see that the 899 actually had to back out of that briefly to try and redefend. It bunched everyone up again and lost any sort of possible move. You can see him jolt to the inside to cover it. But then obviously the Bentley ahead can run away with that. And mine Lawrence just sitting, wanting that position. I do not envy Mikael Sundstrom in that position. You know that you need to make the move, and you can, once you've got past that car, you can get away from it. It's just then you've also got, you know, someone who was around about your grid position as well, chasing you down.
Well, you're frustrated as well, aren't you? Because you know you shouldn't be back here in this position. A mistake has led you to this point, and now you don't have a choice. You don't want to give up any more spots. It's already been that kind of day, so you have to defend, but it's mounting frustrations. The good news is you've only got to do it for another 5.5 minutes or so, and the nightmare will be over. It's always interesting, isn't it? There's always drivers that have good days and frustrating days. Speaking of Harry Conway, it could have been a very different day for Conway. Remember, had contact a couple of times, was bounced off the track at one point, removed themselves from the racetrack at one point, but still here with a shot to finish inside the top 10. That's almost job done if you're Harry Conway.
Yeah, you can see the battle scars that car is carrying now towards the end of the race. But, you know, despite all that, you still cannot shake your finger at a top 10. It will be interesting to see. It kind of felt earlier on like the 28 was more on a dry focus setup. I've not really been paying attention to the 329, one of the other Porsches, who goes very, very deep into turn 1. And that is Conway. He is along the outside for the Mercedes arena. Can he hang it around the outside of the first corner? He can. If you can hang it around the outside of this corner, you have the inside for the run onto one of the back straights that we have, and that is it. 28 gets the position up into the top 10.
That'll make you feel better if you're Harry Conway. All the adversity today, back inside the top 10, perhaps in the top 10 for the first time. I can't quite remember where they qualified, but 10th place for the R B Sports team, as he's calling himself. Definitely not a B anything, A in my book. Harry Conway getting that position, and to the credit of the 329, gave him room, said, hey, if you can make this stick, I'm going to race you for it. Did race him for it, and now is certainly the car looking to get on the attack. Now, what's happened here? Jardier out in front of Boothby. Now, what has happened here? Because Boothby had a second lead on Jardier the last time I looked, and now it has basically flipped now. Jardier out front in this race. The 39 leading Boothby, but not by much, by just about that much. And while we have just a moment before the race ends, just to remind you of some late race incidents that came in. Racing incident between the 725 and the 49. Racing incident between the 82 and the 966. And a 15-second penalty for car 82 for taking out the 108 with no position returned. And those have been the only new stewards' decisions since the last time we spoke about, and will likely be the last ones we speak about for the... Going back to Mikael Sundstrom, I'm being told that he was also a little ill. He was a little under the weather today as well, adding insult to injury. But we focus. The final 3 minutes, 2 laps to go. It is between the 39 and the 75, 2 teammates that have been helping each other on the track and off the track today. Speaking between cockpits as well, but now Jardier out in front of Boothby, who qualified on pole. It's going to come down to the wire here.
Well, with 2 minutes, I'm going to guess around about 2 minutes left on the clock. I think you might get around about 2 more laps left to run. I think the lap times are now coming down and down. The track is rubbering in. That we can see the race logic on the dashboard, and that last lap was a 55 dead, which is, you know, great pace for a green track. We're basically into quali fuel levels now. And looking at the times, yep, it's going to be about 2 more laps as Boothby, late on the brakes, as late as he dares, tries to tuck his car underneath the wing of his fellow Porsche. And yeah, as he says, it's going to definitely come down to the wire. It really depends, I guess, on is there any extra rubber on Boothby's tires because he pitted later than Jardier's? It's hard to tell, really, with the changeable conditions we've had.
Well, 1 week ago in Japan at Suzuka, these 2 cars were running in this configuration. Jardier leading Boothby after a late pit stop strategy call by the 39. Contact in 130R, 2 spins. They gather it back up. Boothby lets Hanzik back through, and they continue racing. Boothby would eventually get by him and win the race. What could it be today? Could it be 2 weeks in a row with contact? Boothby told us in his victory lane interview a week ago, there are no team orders here. We will get after it. We will race each other hard, and they certainly showed that a week ago. I expect the same thing. If Boothby thinks he can get in there, I imagine he might do as much again. And it's going to be very close between them. I would imagine George is going to give him a little bit of a lunge here on this last lap.
It would not surprise me. You can see the 75 is trying to gain that a little bit close. Loses a little bit on the exit. Loses a little bit on the exit. He's now trying, he's on the back foot, trying to get that little bit closer for the down the straight. Will Jardier defend it? I think he knows that even with the slipstream, it's just a little bit too far away for a mad lunge into turn 1. Boothby looks at it, but it's just a juking maneuver. And through turn 1 they go, still nothing to be had yet. I'm trying to think of some of the other places where a pass might come. It might, if the run happens, come down into the Dunlop hairpin, possibly, if Boothby can get the run out of this Sector 1 coming into Sector 2, but it is incredibly tricky to catch up. Such is 0.4 of a second, which doesn't sound like much, but when you are this close of a driver, that gap may as well be an ocean.
Yeah, Dunlop hairpin and the final chicane are your best bet. What I'm worried about for Boothby here is the Schumacher S's. If you get too close, you can suffer from being in somebody's wake. So be very aware of that in a Porsche specifically, and you wouldn't want to do that. But I think he's just far enough behind that it won't be a big deal and take the air off his wing, but albeit too far away to make a final move. It's going to be one last gas for George Boothby, who's led almost the entirety of this race, and now looks like they could finish second to Jardier. Jardier nearly had it done in Suzuka a week ago and just came up about a lap shy from taking the crown there. This week, revised the strategy, came in with the opposite strategy, you could argue, and looks like they're going to end up being the beneficiary because Boothby's falling back and Jardier will come across the final corner and down the front straightaway It's going to be a 1-2, and it's going to be Jardier making up from a week ago and winning here at the Nurburgring. George Boothby will come home second, and unless my math is very much incorrect, will retain the points championship by a couple of points. You didn't think it would be a broadcast if I didn't do the maths, did you? Tinko van der Velde will hold off Taylor, who dropped off just a little bit in those final few minutes. And Tinko van der Velde will finish third. Taylor fourth. Caracas, a quiet race in the 15, rounds out your top five. More racing in the pack as they come to the line. Soldatov looks to get the better of Verstappen, though they're not home yet. Meanwhile, we look at this battle. This could be 15th place for Martin Lawrence if it all goes wrong for those in front of him.
And that, just as you say that, you see the slight amount of dust kicked up from the 899 touching the gravel. That will affect his run down the back straight. He's got to really use the power that 899's got. The Aston Martin looks to the inside, but he's just too far away. If he can keep it clean through the last chicane, I don't think really there is anything that they can do coming onto the back straight. Aston Martin runs a little bit wide, and the 899 comes home, will be behind Dan Mulholland at the 777, but holds off Martin Lawrence at that 171.
Oh, Mikael Sundstrom, frustration, slamming the car into the wall. I can feel his pain. And those are your finishing positions of the day. We called out your top five there, the top 10 across, and now everybody finishing up what has been a roller coaster day with the rain and then the dry weather at the end. And somehow Jardier comes back and wins that race. An excellent job by him to get it done. And speak of the devil, Jaroslav Hanzik with us here. Jardier, you nearly had the strategy right a week ago, but today you absolutely nailed it. How'd you get by Boothby? How did you get the win?
Oh my God, extreme luck today. Oh my God, that was intense race, guys. I'm like done. That was intense. I took a huge risk. I took 80 liters for the start, and I took almost full dry setup. I just did little changes to make it safe, which in the last 4 laps were absolutely terrible because it was so understeery. But yeah, I was extremely lucky, guys.
You and Boothby were the class of the field last week. You were the class of the field this week. Looks like it's going to come down to you two for this championship. I know it's 2 races, but you've both won a race apiece. We talked to Boothby a week ago, said that yes, we're teammates, yes, we're working together, but when it comes to racing, we are going to race each other as hard as anybody else. I think you've proved that the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, obviously we don't want to crash each other, you know, like we did on Suzuka or something, but that was just a tiny mistake. So we just try to take it careful, you know, as we are teammates, but otherwise the gloves are off, you know.
I got to ask you, Jardier, you have one of the best attitudes in the business. How big is your smile right now as you cross that line?
Oh my God, it hurts. It hurts.
I got to say, excellent job. You needed something to get yourself back into the fight. Now it's only going to be a point or two. I think it's only 1 or 2 points between you because he had the pole position, and we'll have to see who had the fastest lap. But it's going to come down to it. I think it's going to be you two. Do you start at some point to plan against your teammate?
You mean like during the championship? No. We just, like, so far, like, both of the races, we both run completely different strategy, you know? Like, today, George took a risk, and he probably went full wet and full tank for the race, but it stopped raining. And last week, it was the opposite way, you know? He took a risk with 1 pit stop, with full change in tires and such, and yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for the next races. If we're going to keep doing this, you know, having different strategy and such, it might be very interesting.
It's been amazing, Jards, I have to say. It's been an absolute pleasure to watch. I'm going to turn you over to my partner, Ryan Mawson.
Yeah, so a question for you. Well, your Porsche, was it more of a hybrid setup, or did you go like a full dry? Because we noticed that the Porsches, there was quite a big dynamic range of setup options. We saw some that were really struggling in the wet, and then they would come back alive in the dries. But your 2 cars just seemed to be, you know, they were completely gone right from the start.
I said, like, I basically took like full dry setup and I did like a little changes to make it like working in the rain as well, which basically helped me in the first, I don't know, first 30 minutes was helping me a lot. But in the last 10 minutes, it was really tough in the dry because like it was for dry, but I made the setup so safe that in the dry, I was like a bit too understeery. No, but yeah, it worked. I was just lucky, because I had a very light car for most of the race, and it stopped raining exactly within a lap when I had to pit again, So yeah, mixed.
And then the only other thing I've got, were you ever worried about the McLaren behind you at the start? We saw Van der Velde, they were trying it, around the Mercedes arena. We thought that Van der Velde might be able to stick with you lot, and if anything happened again, that they might become the beneficiary, but they fell off, obviously, towards the latter half of the race.
Yeah, because I remember I was watching George Woodby's race like 1 month ago, or 2 months ago, and he was racing against Porsches. It's almost exactly the same conditions in McLaren, and those Porsches like destroyed tires in like first 15 minutes of the race, so he was able to hold with them. So I was really afraid at the beginning of the race. I was like, oh my god, now we're gonna I started sliding in the Schumacher races. I had like 2 or 3 very close moments, and I was like, oh my god, this is it, I'm gonna crash and die or something. And then somehow I was just taking really careful and being very careful with the car overall, and it worked. Yeah.
Well, Jardier, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the racetrack. It's awesome to see you back as a winner, and it was an excellent race by you. Excellent strategy for a second week in a row. This time it paid off in dividends. Ladies and gentlemen, winner of race number 2, Jardier.
Thank you.
Well, you don't have to have a great race to put a smile on his face, but certainly a big one for him today. The happiest man in sim racing is what I call him sometimes, and as nothing to frown about today, surely came across in the end. It sort of made up for last week, just got it a little bit wrong. This week, the polar opposite came alive at the right time, and an excellent win. Well, folks, we've got more GT racing action for you coming up this weekend and into next week. Come join Ryan Mawson and myself tomorrow night for some Night Owl action. The new season starting up. Got some excellent names in that as well. And of course, on Monday, the continuation of the Porsche Cup. Ryan Gill bringing you that race. And Thursday, the GT4 Championship. I'll be back with you on that one. And of course, Mawson and I will be right back here with you on Friday for round 3 in this hotly contested Friday GT3 Championship. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, do all the things, because you know you're going to want to be with us. And on top of that, a big thank you to all of our partners that make this race and every race possible. You can get 25% off your driver coaching at driver61.com by using our discount code in the description. If it can make Mike Jones a better driver, it certainly will work for you. A big thank you to Fanatec. Feel free to use our affiliate link at no extra cost to yourself, and it may help us with things like server cost and etc. AK Informatica, big thank you to them for hosting our servers, and Race Department and Sim Racing GP as well. You can check out all of those awesome people in the description. Support those that support RCI. Ryan Mawson, it was an excellent day. It was wet, then it was dry. A surprise change for the lead in the late race. Well, you can't ask for much more.
Nah, Nurburgring always will throw a spanner into the works for some of the teams, but great to see how people manage it, and some of the moves that I thought would come off, too wide through the final chicane and the Schumacher S's and everything did happen, so not to be disappointed.
It certainly was not a disappointment today, and we have round 3 to look forward to with basically nothing in it between the two of them. Will it be somebody else, or will it be the Boothby and Jardier show for a third week? We're just going to have to find out in 1 week's time. Join the Discord, get involved in sim racing. We would love to have you, and a big thank you to all of you for watching today's broadcast. We hope to see you tomorrow and next week as well. On behalf of everybody here at RCI, the stewards, the admins, and the broadcast team, thank you for watching. Have a good night.
And we'll see you at Night Owl.